There are hundreds of basic and alternate recipes in Satisfactory 1.0. Some of them are absolutely amazing, whilst others not so much. So I've made it my mission in Satisfactory to compare every single recipe in the game to inform you guys on what the best and worst recipes are. So welcome to the best recipes in Satisfactory 1.0 series. This video is all about the stator. Stators are very important. They are used to make things like motors, automated wiring, electromagnetic control rods, turbo motors, and a few other items as well, which of course themselves are equally as important. Stators have two recipes. There's the basic stator recipe, which involves steel pipes and wire, and then there's the second alternate recipe, which is the quick wire stator, which, as the name suggests, involves quick wire rather than the standard wire. First, the answer might be quite obvious. This is the best recipe. However, that might not necessarily be the case. To find the best recipe, I've broken down the main two recipes, the basic and the alternate, whilst also adding a cheeky third recipe in there as well, to truly find the definitive best recipe for stators in Satisfactory 1.0. And let's begin with the basic stator recipe. First of all, for all three examples, we will be making 10 stators per minute, and to make these 10 stators, we are going to be needing 30 steel pipes per minute and 80 wire per minute. Both of these respectively have got their own different recipes, two of which I'll be talking about a little bit later on. But if we're just sticking with basic wire, to make our 80 wire, we need 40 copper ingots, and to make our 40 copper ingots, we need 40 copper ore. However, what if you wanted to try and save some resources? Well, that only means one thing. That is right, it's the return of the refinery. I've talked about this a lot, but it's always very important to bring it up whenever I do one of these videos. If you want to try and save on copper, for example, if you want to try and make those 40 copper ingots we were just talking about earlier, rather than needing your 40 copper ore to make your 40 ingots, you now only need 16 copper ore, but unfortunately you also need some water as well. But if you're making thousands of copper, this is actually quite a good method, because of course it saves you a ton of ore. The same method can also be applied for iron, yttrium, concrete, and quartz crystals, again where you save a bunch of raw resources but you include a bit of water. Like previously mentioned, if you are making thousands of these things, the refinery can be rather helpful. Of course it does consume more power though, and obviously it does consume more water. This is the basic recipe, however. Moving on, let's talk a little bit more about steel pipes, because again, we need 30 steel pipes to make our 10 stators. To make these 30 steel pipes, there's a couple different methods you could use. For this example, I've opted for the basic recipe. I'll talk a bit more about this later on, but the good thing about the molded steel pipe, however, is that you actually end up saving a bit of steel by incorporating some concrete, which obviously just uses limestone. And if you use the wet concrete example that I just showed you earlier, you actually have to use a bit of water, but you end up saving on some limestone. So all three of these examples have got different benefits. I've made an entire video talking about steel. If you do want to check that out, then feel free. When it comes to our steel ingots, we need 45. And I have got a clear, definitive answer for the best steel recipe. And it's a solid steel ingot down here. You end up saving a good amount of iron and a good amount of coal. And again, I explain all of this in my steel video that I just mentioned previously. In all honesty, this recipe is not too bad. The only downside is that you are consuming 3 different types of resources: copper, coal, and iron. If you're okay with doing that, then this basic recipe is not too bad at all. And again, in total, these are the resources we are consuming: 40 copper ore, 30 coal, and 30 iron ore per minute. And in regards of machine and power consumption, we are looking at 2 assemblers, 5 constructors, 1 foundry, and 3 smelters, all of which giving you a total of 59 megawatts being consumed. Well, in general, per minute. It's not really per minute, it's just 59 megawatts being consumed, which isn't really that bad. But how does this compare to our second recipe? Well, let's take a quick look. And this recipe is called quick wire stator, and again, we are making 10 stators per minute. This time, however, we are only needing 20 steel pipes, so straight away we're actually saving steel and of course iron and coal from this recipe, which of course ends up saving you a bunch of power and resources, so that's pretty cool. But let's talk a little bit more about the quick wire, since obviously this is the main part of this recipe. We are needing 75 quick wire per minute, but there's a couple different ways in which you can make this. Just very quickly, if you enjoy videos like this and you want more guides, tips and tricks, then feel free to subscribe if you wish. You don't have to, but it's a good way to support the channel. You'll also get notified whenever I drop one of these videos. Thank you for all the continued support on the channel, but without further ado, let's get straight back into the video. We've got the basic way where you can make 75 quick wire from 15 Caterium ingots, which is not bad at all. Let's say that Caterium is a problem for you, but you really like this recipe. Well, don't fear, because instead you can do this. You can make 75 quick wire only using 6.25 Caterium, which saves you over half of your Caterium ingots. However, instead you have to use some copper ingots. But we're not done just there, because from your 15 Caterium ingots, you need 45 Caterium ore. Or do you? That is right, we are going back to our friend Mr. Refinery, because to make our 15 Caterium ingots now, we only need 30 Caterium ore rather than 45, and let's see that we use the copper example that I showed you just previously, where we needed 6.25 Caterium ingots. Well, now you are only consuming 12.5 Caterium ore, compared to the 45 that we are using in the basic recipe, but now of course you are consuming copper and water. And in case you want to consume a bit less copper ingots, well, you know exactly where we're going to go again. We're going to use our pure copper ingot recipe, where we're only consuming 18 copper ore and some water. This just goes to show how many different recipes there are in Satisfactory, and hopefully just talking about the quickwire was able to make you understand there are multiple different ways to make something rather basic. For example, to make iron ingots, there's many different ways, let alone steel ingots, then your steel pipes, then your quickwire. There are thousands, if not tens of thousands of combinations in this game, but I think that this is a pretty good one. Here's a quick example of what this quickwire recipe looks like when it's all drawn out, including the water and including the copper ingot alternate recipe. It looks a lot more complicated because technically it is, but you do end up saving quite a lot of Caterium ingots, thus saving you Caterium ore. However, you are now using refineries and water. So you do have to get liquid involved and refineries, which is much bigger than a constructor and consumes more power. But if power is not a problem, and if you're building next to a water source, and of course if you're trying to save Caterium, which who isn't, then this might be a fantastic recipe for you. Now let's take a very quick gander at the total resources consumed in the second recipe, and don't worry, I will be comparing all three recipes at the end of the video. So regarding Caterium ore, you are consuming 45 per minute, unless you use those tricks I showed you prior, where this is a lot less. You are also consuming 20 coal per minute and 20 iron ore per minute. And in regards of machines used and power consumption, we are looking at 43.5 megawatts worth of power consumption, and the usual assemblers, constructors, foundries, and smelters all being used. A few of you might be looking at this though and going, well, why does it say 18 megawatts? Two assemblers consumes 30 megawatts. Well, the reason as to why these powers might not necessarily match up is because not all of these are being worked or consumed at 100% efficiency, thus meaning this is not consuming 30 megawatts but instead 18 megawatts. I go over every single machine in the game, add up the percentage of how much of the machine is being used, and then calculate the total power requirements from that, which does take a significant amount of extra time. I think it is quite important for videos like this that you get a rough, if not an exact estimate of the amount of power being consumed. In theory, these are the only two stator recipes in Satisfactory 1.0 as of yet. However, I want to show you one more example, just to try and show you what alt recipes can really do in this game. And again, we are making 10 stators per minute, but we are only consuming iron. How the heck have I done that? Well, essentially, I've used the basic stator recipe, which uses our steel pipes and wire, but instead, I've used iron wire and iron pipe, both of which only consume iron, as the names probably suggest, which then consumes 165 iron ore. However, as we can see here, if we times everything by 10, 165 iron ingots consumed only 89 iron ore, and roughly 50 water per minute if you use the pure iron ingot recipe in the refinery. So you can actually half the amount of iron ore used for this, and of course use a bit of extra water, which then saves you completely on coal, copper, and Caterium if you don't want to use any of them. The main reason why I like things like this, for example, is that it's so much easier to find a 165 iron node rather than one Caterium node, one copper node, and one iron node and water potentially, all next to each other. Logistically, this is the best stator recipe in the game. Not to mention that if you want to try and make a blueprint factory, you very easily can using this recipe, because again, you are only really using iron, and the maximum amount of resources that you are traveling on one belt is 120, which of course is a Mark II belt. So again, logistically, this is fantastic. One of the downsides though is that you do consume the most amount of power, but 65 megawatts still isn't really that bad, considering you're only really using smelters, constructors, and assemblers, rather than any foundries, because again, everything here is made using smelters, and constructors, and assemblers. Or of course you could use refineries if you want to have a bit less iron ore consumption. It is time to crown the best Stator recipe. So let's have a quick comparison of all the resources, bearing in mind that this quick-wire recipe has the best power consumption. So when it comes to copper, the last recipe consumes obviously the least amount, but if we don't consider that here for a second, then this first recipe consumes the most. In regards of core consumption, again, the first recipe consumes the most, and it also consumes the most iron as well. So in theory, the basic recipe consumes the most out of any resource we've talked about, despite it not even being that bad a recipe. Moving on to our quick-wire recipe, we consume not that much coal, not that much iron, however, a decent amount of Caterium ore, unless you would like to use a couple of those quick-wire recipes we were talking about throughout the video. And our final recipe, again, just uses iron. So in my opinion, none of these recipes are bad before you start panicking and thinking you've chosen the wrong recipe. Don't worry, none of them are terrible. But logistically, I think this one's fantastic. Power-wise, this one's pretty good. And simplicity, this one's okay as well. But I'm still going to crown the basic Stator recipe with iron alts as my favorite Stator recipe in Satisfactory 1.0. Purely for simplicity. And trust me, when you're doing logistics, this will save you a lot of time. I know I most certainly have saved a lot of time doing it. But as always, comment down below what your favorite recipe is, and thank you very much for watching. Before we go, a massive thank you to the channel members: Chaos Rising, Scotland Hattie, Mau Mau, Natormal, Yamikael Burns, Variants, Asuna, Nicole Still Plays, and Zhao. If you decide to become a Knight of the Realm for just £2.99 a month, you get access to channel-only emotes, unique badges, and also shoutouts in videos. Memberships are the best way to support my channel, but you don't have to become a member. Even just by watching today's video, you are supporting the channel massively. Here's a couple more videos I've made that you might be interested in. Thank you so much for watching today's video. Have an amazing rest of your day, and remember, Godspeed.